In the late 90s, Pokémon was deep into the height of its popularity in both the United States and Japan. By 1999, there were 3 games for the Game Boy, Pokémon Red, Blue, and Yellow, as well as games for the Game Boy Color like Pokémon Pinball. Microsoft Windows like Pokémon Play It, and the N64 hit Pokémon Snap had just been released. Plus, the announcements of Pokémon Gold, Silver, and the trading card game all coming out the following year of 2000. Pokémon was shaping up to soar with their popularity into the 21st century. But a question that many fans had on their minds back in the cusp of the new millennium started to form. Pokemon Snap is nice and all, but will we ever get a Pokemon battle game for the home console, the N64? And of course, Nintendo, HAL Laboratories, Game Freak, and Creatures Inc. would answer that question in 2000 with Pokémon Stadium. But if you were living in Japan in good old 99, you already got to play Pokémon Stadium, and Pokémon Stadium 2, and you were awaiting the announcement of Pokémon Stadium 3. So what's the story with Pokémon Stadium? And why did Japan get a trilogy while we got a duology? I mean, it's interesting. Japan and the US were both in the peak of Pokemon fever in 1999. In Japan, the card game had become a success, and Gold and Silver were about to release with plans for Crystal to come out the following year. The anime was riding high going into its 3rd season, and a huge slew of new Pokemon merchandise was being released almost every week. While in the United States, the card game was taking off just as Pokemon Red and Pokemon Blue were hitting huge sales numbers following its 1998 release. On top of that, the anime was becoming such a huge hit on Kids WB going into the 2nd dub season that the network heads at the WB were looking into the possibility of shuffling the network lineup to include more important material. On top of that, the success of the anime also led to the other big kids network competition, Fox Kids, into doing the same thing, leading to the release of Digimon from Bandai later on in 1999, and Flimp the Time Detective from Sanrio in 2000. These successes would eventually also lead to Pokemon's then dubbing partner 4Kids Entertainment to license more anime from Japan for dubbing, like Sonic X and One Piece, to sell to networks like Fox and the WB, and eventually later on the CW until 2014. So why did I just do a deep explanation of the success of the Pokemon anime when this should be about the N64 games? I don't know. I guess just to give an example of how successful Pokemon was at that point in time. And that's not to say Pokemon's not as popular or fell out of style nowadays. I mean, the games are still coming out, and the anime is running into its 24th season. And cards and other merchandise are still being produced. I guess the point I'm trying to get to is that when kids back in 1999 were excited to see Pokémon the first movie in theaters, Burger King was making a shit ton of money off of the movie tie-in meals, and shows like South Park and Recess were parodying the popularity of the property so much that the question of will this be a fad was almost completely shot down by the mid-2000s, and that kids who grew up with this series are now either artists, voice actors, game developers, or scientists in certain degrees. Yeah, that's how huge Pokemon was. With that popularity, the intentions of releasing some Pokemon games for the N64 was inevitable. So, the first N64 Pokemon game ever to be released was Pocket Monster Stadium in Japan in 1998, and so our story begins. It was 1997. Nintendo had just released the highly anticipated Nintendo 64 a year prior, and at first sales were good, but a little sluggish when compared to Sony's PlayStation. Nintendo, however, was not deterred as they had a few tricks left up their sleeve, with the announcement of an add-on for the system. The Nintendo 64 Disk Drive, or the N64 DD. Slated for release sometime in the fall of 97 or the spring of 98. We'll get into this in a little bit. Production on this add-on was considered by some game developers as a chance to expand their creativity, given the fact that the N64 alone was limited in its capabilities due to the format they chose of cartridges. It should be noted that by the time the N64 was out, CD-ROM based games had risen with the popularity of PC gaming, the Sega Saturn, and the Mega CD. This is Sega CD to us Americans. And the Sony PlayStation. Add on top of that CD gaming in Japan had gotten popular after the launch of the PC Engine CD, or the TurboGrafx CD to us Americans again, and the fact that Nintendo inadvertently created the PlayStation after having a falling out with Sony in 1992. Man, I am really getting off track today. So, how was Nintendo planning to upgrade their system with the N64DD? With floppy diskettes. Yep, Nintendo's answer to the CD was the same answer Nintendo had for the introduction of HuCards, floppy diskettes. This time they were larger, grayer, and more fragile, but the upside to that was that the disc could hold more data. Similar to how the Famicom discs could hold 128 kilobytes of data, the N64DD disc could hold up to 64 megabits, and with additional internet capabilities via a dial-up modem. Oh my god, I'm getting old. Nintendo hoped that this add-on would satisfy the demands of the mid to late 90s gaming fanbase. With the announcement of the system, Nintendo also announced their huge slate of games for it, including Super Mario 64 DD, The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, then known as Zelda 64, SimCity 64, the Mario Artist series, Mother 3, Donkey Kong 64, Animal Forest, and the one every Pokemon fan was in shock over, Pocket Monsters 64, which was slated for release March of 1998. Now, of course, we know that the N64DD never got any of these games except for SimCity 64 and the Mario Artist series, along with some other games like Doshin the Giant. To make a long story short on the N64DD, it was released in December of 1999, after 2 years of delay. It had some hidden gems, but was too expensive. The US never got it, even though they were slated to get it in 1998, and the online service was hit or miss. By February of 2001, Nintendo dropped their online service RanNet, and thus ended the life of the N64DD. But anyways, back to Pokemon. While developing the game in 1997, the higher-ups at HAL Laboratories and the Nintendo EAD were informed that there was a possibility that the N64DD could be delayed again from its March 18, 1998 release window, and that it would be more ideal to switch production of Pocket Monsters 64, now known as Pocket Monster Stadium, over from the N64DD to the regular N64, with there being a possible chance in the future for the game to get an N64DD port that could possibly contain any missing material from the game. After switching over, the development team ran into a snag in regards to the number of characters they could have in the game. The original plan in the N64DD period was to have all 151 Pokemon creatures available for selection, but once they switched over to the regular N64 cartridges, they found themselves limited to only 42, thus leading to them deciding to have most of the creatures be in their evolved forms. The way they remedied not having all of the creatures in the game was by having all 151 Pokemon available to look up and read in a Pokédex feature, thus keeping the concept of all of them being in the game. Another thing that should be mentioned is how closely tied this game was to the actual Pokemon tournaments being held in Japan at the time. The Pokemon League National Convention was a tournament series that began in 1997, right around the time the game was in development. As a prize for the finalists of these tournaments that year, Nintendo would use the finalists' likeness as computer and tournament opponents in both Pocket Monster Stadium and Pocket Monster Stadium 2. Surprisingly, another issue the developers would constantly run into while developing the game was how to implement in the battle system from the Game Boy games. Enter the late, great Satoru Iwata, who was the president of HAL Laboratories at the time. Iwata had been with HAL since the early 1980s, working on games for Nintendo like Balloon Fight, Golf, and Pinball. On top of that, he had also been fundamental in the development of some games from a then newcomer in the early 1990s, Masahiro Sakurai, and his works like the Kirby series and the Super Smash Bros. Series. Story has it that Iwata spent a whole week having to read over the entire source code from the Game Boy systems, then try to get Shigeki Morimoto's program battle systems from Red, Green, and Yellow implemented onto the N64 hardware. On top of that, Iwata and the crew at HAL also had to get Pokemon Red, Green, and Yellow cartridges to be compatible with the N64. They were able to achieve that by creating the Game Boy to N64 Transfer Pack. This accessory would end up being bundled with copies of Pocket Monster Stadium. When the game was released on August 1st, 1998, it was a decent success, pulling in 270,000 copies in its first month alone. Overall, the game would sell 1.095 million copies in Japan. This made the game the 5th best-selling N64 game in Japan as of 2003. The game was such a hit that the Pokemon League National Convention's 1998 tournaments would use this game for their events instead of the link cable battles on copies of Red and Green via the Super Game Boy 2. So here's my copy of Pokémon Stadium. I got a complete in box back in 2019. Playing it a couple of times since then, I could honestly say, for being the first Pokemon game made for the N64, it can hold up. It's no masterpiece, don't get me wrong. But it was also the first attempt at doing, at least in a small fashion, a home console Pokemon game. And I have to give it that respect. Am I upset that there was only 42 out of the original 151? Yeah, but at the same time, at least they tried to pick what they considered the best from the original 151 set. Plus, I think that the Game Boy emulation for Red, Green, Yellow is a nice added feature, because in all honesty, we never got a dedicated Game Boy player for the N64. Sure, there was the Y-Boy 64 by Intelligent Systems, but that's more or less used for testing Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance games at the time. We wouldn't see another dedicated Game Boy player, well, since the Super Game Boy, until the GameCube was released in 2001, with the Game Boy Player add-on coming in 2003. You know, looking back at this game, it gives me an understanding as to why Nintendo may not have wanted to release it at the time. Yeah, when going through the sales figures for the game in Japan and realizing that the game was never properly finished the way that Nintendo and Hale had wanted it to be, it doesn't surprise me that Nintendo would decide not to release this in the US. I mean, how upset would you have been to have been a recent fan of the games, the anime, and the cards, to discover that the N64 was going to get a Pokemon game that was only going to contain less than a third of the creatures? I would have been disappointed. I would have felt like I was cheated out of $60 for a game that's only highlight would have been able to play the original games on the TV, something that you were technically able to do anyways with a Super Game Boy and a SNES. Nintendo knew this going into the holiday of 1998, so it was decided for the sake of the US and to capitalize on the popularity the series was gaining not only in the US but in Japan to do a sequel game. And thus began work on Pokémon Stadium 2, or as we know it here in the US, Pokémon Stadium. Production on Pokémon Stadium 2 began as soon as the first game was released. As previously stated, Pokémon Stadium was considered incomplete due to Hale and Nintendo having to work within the limits of the original N64 cartridge and hardware. The idea they had originally decided upon back in the spring of '98 was that Pokémon Stadium would be a standalone N64 game, with the follow-up Pokémon Stadium 2 being an N64 disk drive to fill in the missing elements from the game. While developing the N64 DD version of the game, new developments were being made at Nintendo on the original N64, with the release of a new device called the Expansion Pack. This device would increase the N64's RAM from 4MB to 8MB. This will lead to more memory on the system for better textures and graphics, and more game models to be added in certain games like The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, and for better effects like motion blur. The teams at Hale and Nintendo would use this add-on to better utilize the 64MB of data they had on the cartridge. These would include the inclusion of tournaments consisting of 4 cups, or overall 80 battles in total. The Gym Leader Castle tournaments, in which players had to beat the Kanto Region Gym Leaders and the Kanto Elite Four. Stadium Mode, mini-games, a Hall of Fame, Game Boy printer compatibility, and a special battle with Mewtwo. This also meant that more Pokemon creatures can be used, going from 42 in the first game to the full 151 roster in this game. When the game was released on April 30th, 1999 in Japan, it was a slight hit, selling 710,765 copies by 2003, making it the N64's 15th best-selling game in Japan. Because the game was more filled out and fully realized than the previous one, Nintendo of America decided to release Pokémon Stadium 2 in the US, renaming the game to Pokémon Stadium almost a year later on February 29, 2000. The US release would become an ultimate hit, selling over 1 million copies in its first month alone, becoming the best-selling console game in the North America region in 2000. Nintendo would later go on to give it a Player's Choice label and reduce the price on December 26 that same year. By the end of the N64's life, the game went on to sell about 3.97 million copies, with 3.16 of those coming from the US. So here's my copy of Pokémon Stadium 2 and its US equivalent, Pokémon Stadium. And all I can honestly say is that, yeah, this is a fully fleshed out and realized game that Nintendo and Hale were trying to make back in '98. Whether it was due to time crunch or the technology from the N64 that was not fully there yet, they were never able to fully finish this game, and so Pokémon Stadium 2 had to pick up the load where the last game left off. And I'm going to be honest with you, it was a valiant effort. The teams were able to improve upon what was laid down in the original game and add more to it with cups and additional tournaments. With all of that success Pocket Monster Stadium 2 brought, it was a no-brainer for Nintendo to greenlight another sequel. Pocket Monster Stadium 3 Gold and Silver, no joke, was greenlit because of the success of Pocket Monster Stadium 2, or Pokémon Stadium, in the US. When the team began work on Pocket Monster Stadium 3, the idea they had come up with was to continue with the smooth-outs of the base game from '98, but make some new features like Free Battle, a practice battle where you could set up and train with, and make new adjustments to the code to start the process of integrating the next generation of Pokemon being released. In the winter of 1999, months after the release of Pocket Monster Stadium 2, Game Freak, Creatures Inc., and Nintendo would release the next generation of the Pokemon franchise, Pokemon Gold and Silver, with Crystal being released the following winter in 2000. So it was a no-brainer to have the next Pocket Monster Stadium game focus on the characters from Gold, Silver, and Crystal. This would also lead to a name change during the development when the team decided to rename the game from Pocket Monster Stadium 3 to Pocket Monster Stadium Gold and Silver. Although I still personally call it Pocket Monster Stadium 3 Gold and Silver. One more thing to add in regards to the game and its connection with Pokemon Crystal. When Pokemon Crystal was in development, Creatures, Game Freak, and Nintendo had decided to launch a new feature to the game, mobile phone connectivity. In January 2001, Nintendo would partner with Mobile 21 to create the mobile Game Boy adapter. This adapter would allow a Game Boy user to download any additional content for certain games that were compatible with the device, check their emails, send text messages, or play with anyone who had the device over the internet. A total of 24 games were compatible with the device, including Pokemon Crystal. With the mobile GB adapter, players were able to access special Pokemon Communication Center to get later information on the game, play mini-games, and take quizzes via the Pokemon News Machine, link up and trade or battle Pokemon with a friend, and finally they could receive a Pokeball called the GS Ball, which would be used to capture a wild level 30 Celebi and a rare Pokemon egg called the Odd Egg. Man, that must all sound enticing. Too bad Nintendo shut down the service 2 years later, and those items I mentioned were all part of some special event that only occurred about twice a year. God damn it, Nintendo. Yep, in December 2002, Nintendo shut down the mobile Game Boy adapter functionalities. They cited that it was because of low sales, with the accessory only selling around 80,000 units. If that wasn't bad enough, another reason that was cited was low traffic. Even with 80,000 units, Nintendo's traffic numbers never made up for that low volume. What also didn't help in those regards were the charges. Oh yeah, that's right, you were being charged for using this accessory. Not only was there a 400 yen or $4 upfront charge just to activate it, there was a fee of 10 yen or $1 per minute you were using it. And that's not also including the charges the cell phone company you were attached to were charging, and the cost of the content. It, in all honesty, was so bad that Nintendo had a rule set that if the total amount of paid content you were using exceeded 10,000 yen, or $100 a month, then you were going to be cut off for that month. Okay, really got off track there. The question you're probably asking yourself right now is, what does this have to do with Pocket Monster Stadium 3? Well, kind of a lot, seeing as Nintendo decided to add the functionality of being able to view saved battles from the failed service in the game via the mobile stadium. Wow, Nintendo, you are really the gift that keeps on giving. When the game was released on December 14, 2000, it was released coinciding with the release of Pokemon Crystal. The game was a better success with fans than Pocket Monster Stadium 2 was, selling 780,017 copies by 2003, making it the 12th best-selling N64 game in Japan. The game would get a release in the US on March 26, 2001 under the moniker of Pokemon Stadium 2. This game would be known to the US as the last Pokemon game to be released for the N64, as a few months later the GameCube would be released and Nintendo would start phasing out the N64 going into 2002. So my feelings on Pocket Monster Stadium 3 Gold and Silver are a little mixed. On the one hand, a lot of time and effort went into this one to really polish up the engine that the team had been using since 1998. However, when you realize that the team literally had 1.5 years to implement in the new characters, functions, modes, and add on top of that the idea that Nintendo wanted you to use this game to view battles from an online service that was only in Japan, expensive, and had the nerve to give you an event that only occurred twice a year, if that for only 2 years, add in the fact that 3 new Pokemon games were being produced at the same time as well, and had to be integrated into this game, I'm kind of mixed on it. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying the US release is better either. Remember, this was the last Pokemon game to be released for the system in the United States, and we wouldn't see another home console Pokemon game for at least 2 to 3 years. not till Pokemon Coliseum. Now, don't get me wrong again, this one isn't bad, I just have a different outlook on it since I had to do the research on the development of the game. To make a long story short, while it was upsetting to know that Japan was to get a full trilogy out of the spin-off series on the N64, I also can't fault Nintendo at the same time for not releasing the first game here in the US. There were a lot of factors that had to be played for Nintendo to even make that game sell in the US. Remember, the anime was a few months away from releasing here in the US. The first two games were to be released in 1 month for the Game Boy. Nintendo wasn't even sure at the time if this series was even going to work. Had they decided to release it, there could have been one of two possibilities. The game releases for the holiday of 1998, closely tying in the release of the anime series in syndication on Kids WB. The kids of the time would have found out about it, got it for Christmas, and either would have loved it and thought it was the game that they were hoping Red and Blue would have been, or for option 2, the game comes out for Holiday 98. The kids who were fans of Red and Blue get the game, only to discover the lack of all 151 Pokemon and additional features set them off, that they decide never to play a Pokemon game again based on this bad experience. The anime possibly flops because of this backlash, and Pokemon never takes off in the US due to the idea that Nintendo rushed a game into development following the surprising success of Red and Blue and made a dud game. Plus, it's not like the US got an exclusive Pokemon game. In 2000, the US and Europe would get Pokemon Puzzle League. This game was based on the anime series and was a port of the Japanese exclusive puzzle series Panel Upon. In this game, you play as Ash Ketchum competing in a Pokemon puzzle tournament against Team Rocket and the Elite Four. So I honestly feel like it was a good trade-off for not getting Pocket Monster Stadium. In the end, we still got a good amount of Pokemon games for the N64, and I feel like there was a strong enough variety for any Pokemon fan. Besides, I feel like I wasted most of the episode bitching about the N64 DD, the mobile GB adapter. Plus, I talked about anime in the late 90s. What the fuck is wrong with me? I mean, Jesus, what the fuck? Catch 'em, gotta catch 'em all, Pokemon!